Hi, today we are going to talk about baby formula, more specifically about this Blue Sky post that was posted by Robert R. Raymond. So he says, I just found out that Nestle spends millions of dollars annually to lobby Congress against paid maternity leave. They do this because they make baby formula. Anyways, kids, don't forget that it's immigrants, trans kids, and China who are your enemies. So I wanted to know, is it true? Is it true that Nestle spends millions of dollars to prevent women to get paid maternity leave so that some who cannot take days off of work are forced to use their products? So this is what I read up this week. And in this video, I'm not just going to talk about Nestle specifically. I'm going to talk about all those companies here: Nestle, Danone, Reckitt Benckiser, Abbott, Friesland, Campina, Bellamy's, Kraft Heinz, Hip Organic, Perigo, and Arla. So all of these companies, they make baby formula. And in this video, I'll call all these companies the CMF industry. CMF. It stands for Commercial Milk Formula Industry. And before starting, let me just make it clear. I'm going to levy criticism against those companies, but that doesn't mean that I think baby formula is bad. Baby formula in itself is a good thing, but it's the companies that are selling it that are doing bad things. And so baby formula has allowed a lot of people who couldn't breastfeed to be able to breastfeed. So for example, here is a graph that was made for reasons given for not breastfeeding in Canada. So 46.3% said other reason, 26.2% did not want to breastfeed, so perhaps just a personal reason or because they were working, 24% because of medical condition, and 3.5% no support or info to breastfeed. And so this is a bit more complicated than it seems, but there's some people that just cannot breastfeed. There's infants in adoptive centers that need to eat, and so baby formula is a good thing, but not the companies themselves that are selling baby formula. So to know whether or not the claim that was made by the guy on Blue Sky is true, we're gonna need just a bit of context. So it all started in 1974 with an investigation made by the War on Want called the Baby Killer. So the baby killer, basically what it said in that investigation is that the baby food industry stands accused of promoting their products in communities which cannot use them properly, of using advertising, sales girls dressed up in nurses' uniforms, give away samples, and free gift gimmicks that persuade mothers to give up breastfeeding. So basically what those companies would do is they would hire sales girls dressed up in nurses' uniforms to appear more authoritative on the subject and sell it to mothers that were breastfeeding. And so, for example, these ladies were selling it, and if they didn't sell enough, they would get fired. Here it says some nurses will be paid a commission on sales results in their area. Sometimes they will also be given the added stick that if they don't meet those objectives, they will be fired. So you can guess that some of them, to not get fired, they probably pushed it a bit more than they should, a bit more than it's ethical. And so what happened is that during the 1950s throughout the 1970s, what happened is that there was a huge decrease in breastfeeding. So in Chile, the worst example is 95% of 1-year-olds were being breastfed 20 years ago, so in 1954, and now in 1974, only 20% of infants are being breastfed at 2 months. So there was a huge decrease. Now, what's the reason behind this decrease? Well, according to the investigation, it said 14% said that they had been told to start by a milk company nurse or being given a free sampling bottle when they were still satisfactorily breastfeeding. 43% said that they had insufficient milk, but when questioned further, the doctor that conducted the research, he said many mothers who said they had insufficient milk obviously had enough when questioned further. So the thing that is complicated with breastfeeding is that breastfeeding is not done by a mechanical thing like this bottle that I can just, suck on. And when there's liquid, it comes out. And when there's no liquid, it doesn't come out. The flow of milk is a nervous mechanism, meaning that it is easily upset by emotional influences like fear, pain, uncertainty, or embarrassment. And so what that means is that if the companies that are selling infant formula can make mothers fearful, uncertain about their breastfeeding capabilities, then they could sell more products. And as we'll see later, this is what happened. And so when we look back, for example, at this graph, at the 24% that said medical condition, perhaps there's a percentage of them that could breastfeed, but because of marketing or a community that is just not supportive enough, then that could make mothers not be able to breastfeed. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that they were selling those baby formula to mothers who didn't have access to any washing facilities. They were selling it to mothers who did not have like a proper stove, and the pot that they were using were the pot that they were cooking food in. So it was really hard to sanitize. And also most third world mothers at that time were illiterate. Now it's better, obviously, but at that time in 1974, it was most third world mothers that were illiterate. And so in the baby formula instruction manuals, it would say, hey, you need to wash your hands before feeding your child. You need to put the tip of the bottle in boiling water to sanitize it. But, they couldn't do that because they didn't have any washing facilities here. They didn't have any sanitized pot to boil it in, and also most mothers were illiterate, and so no matter if you had little cute pictures that would explain everything, they couldn't read. It wasn't very great, and so a lot of babies in those countries ended up having a lot of infections. So that's the second problem. The third problem is that it was really expensive. For example, if we look at Egypt, if we look at the cost at 3 months per day based on the minimum wage, in the United States, not a lot of people are paid minimum wage, which is, I think, $7.25. But at that time in 1974, in those countries, a lot of people were being paid minimum wage. And so 40.8% of their salary was a reality for a lot of people. But the thing is, a baby grows. And so you need more and more feed. And so at 6 months, it says here, 63% of their salary were being spent on baby formula. And what happened is, because that's way too much. If we go see like India, it was 22.7%, and then 35%, still very significant. And so what happened is that these mothers, what they started doing is they started diluting it to save money. They started adding more water than it was necessary and giving it to their babies. And so this caused a lot of babies to be underfed. And so if we take it all together, right? If we take it all together, what they were claiming in that baby killer investigation is that they use unethical selling tactics by using milk nurses that looked more authoritative. They created uncertainty with their marketing by saying, when mother's milk isn't enough, if it isn't enough, then you should use our product. And then it caused infections because they didn't have the facilities to sanitize everything. And lastly, it was very expensive. And so these babies that had infections, that had diarrhea, that basically all their nutrients were being flushed out, they couldn't get those nutrients back because those mothers were diluting the baby formula, and so they couldn't get back those nutrients. And so this caused a vicious cycle where the babies would get infections and they wouldn't get enough nutrient, and that's why it's called the baby killer, the investigation, because a lot of babies died at that time. This caused in 1981 the WHO to institute what is called the code. So the code is basically how it's named in those papers that I read, but it's basically the name. It's called the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. And essentially what they did is they said, okay, well, no advertising for infant feeding products anywhere within public services, no contact between company personnel and pregnant women or mothers, no free samples to health professionals or mothers, and only scientific and factual information free from commercial bias used in the care of babies and their parents. And here, this one, free from commercial bias, we'll see, it's not really respected. But now, let's go back to the claim, because I spent quite a lot of time just explaining the context behind it, but it's important to know the context. Fast forward to 2023, that's when the Lancet came out with their big investigation saying that the commercial milk formula industry deploys a sophisticated and highly effective marketing playbook to turn the care and concern of parents and caregivers into business opportunities. And basically, that's where the claim, I think, was started, that these companies would lobby Congress against paid maternity leave. So I checked to see where did that claim come from, and the only thing I found is this paragraph. So it says, despite these benefits of paid leave marketing, narratives present CMF as the solution for working families, and some industry lobby groups have cautioned against maternity protection reforms. And so if we look at here you can see 156. That's the citation. And so if we look at the citation, it goes to an article from the Irish Times, which says IBEC, I think it's one of the lobby group or one of the companies, says extra paid parental leave will be extremely costly for small businesses. So basically, that was at the time where they had parental leave and benefit bill on the floor, and it would extend the parental leave from 7 weeks to 9 weeks in whatever country that was. And so they said publicly that it would be extremely costly for small businesses. So that's the only thing I found where the CMF industry is actively lobbying, not lobbying, but advertising against paid parental leave. I haven't seen anything more than that. Unfortunately, there's no like direct thing. I don't think we can know the direct influence that a lobbyist had on a certain bill. I don't know if we can really quantify their influence. Even though I don't have like direct evidence, I think it's plausible to say that these companies probably have some type of influence on parental leave. Now, is that influence enough to completely bar it from ever being reality in the United States or in other countries? Probably not. But there's probably still a bit of influence. And here's why I think so. If we look at their lobbying efforts, we can see that they lobby quite a lot. It says here, an analysis of corporate lobbying in relation to U.S. government's positions to WHO found parties connected with the CMF industry or listing CMF-related concerns in their disclosures spent almost $7 million on WHO-related lobbying activities in 2016. And also, if we look at between 2007 and 2018, the largest 6 U.S. CMF manufacturers together spent $184 million on lobbying the US government. So they do spend a lot of money on lobbying. So with that said, you could say, yeah, it might have an influence. Now, unfortunately, there's no direct evidence. The funny thing is that the public persona, these companies, they look very professional and they say, hey, we try to interact responsibly with public authorities. We are like responsible in how we interact with them. But in the paper, it says that they outsource much of their lobbying to a diverse range of front groups, many of which they have co-established and coordinate. So they have this like very clean public persona and say we act very responsibly, but on the back end they invest in a lot of companies that push their interests. And since those companies probably have very, very similar interests, even though they compete against each other, probably most of them want more lax regulations. And so if we go back to the claim saying, I just found out that Nestle spends millions of dollars annually to lobby Congress, that is true. That is completely true. Against paid maternity leave, that is very plausible. Is it enough to be able to turn the balance in their favor when it comes to like the legislation? I don't know. This is a harder claim to make, but I don't think it's the best claim you can make against those companies. If we look back at the Lancet here, if we look back at it, there's much better information, much better things that you can criticize those companies for. For example, one thing that they do is that they pathologize normal infant behavior in order to sell more products. So here it says parents and health professionals frequently misinterpret typical unsettled baby behaviors as signs of milk insufficiency or inadequacy. And so what they do is that they say, hey, when your baby is crying or when your baby doesn't have enough sleep or when he's fuzzy or when he has a colic or anything like that, well, use our product. Use our golden milk. Use the golden milk, and it will quickly soothe colic and crying in 1 day. Wow! Or use our Nutrimilk, Optimilk, specially formulated for babies with fuzziness, gas, and colic and crying. And so they will sell those companies to solve a problem that they basically have created by saying, hey, if you have those problems with your babies, use baby formula. It's probably a sign of you not being good enough, And another thing that you can criticize those companies for is that they're not using really good science in order to make their claim. And that's because in countries like the US, they're not regulated as medicine. Medicine requires a lot higher evidence, a lot more evidence to make your claims. They're regulated as food. So for food, you don't have to have as much evidence to make your claim. And so they can go around and say, hey, do you want your child to have a higher IQ and to be Einstein, smarter, quicker? Or do you want to make your child have HMOs and ECO prebiotics? And what's funny is that in this one, it says, important notice, not all claims have been scientifically proven. Yeah. And so these companies can make those claims even though it's not really supported, as we'll see later. And so if we look at here, it says review that included 153 studies showed how marketing practices in violation of the code is the code that we talked about, have continued in nearly 100 countries and in every region of the world since its adoption in 1981. And it says also, CMF marketing strategies also used in other industries systematically distort science, capture healthcare providers and parents, alter public opinion, and influence policymakers. So that's the thing that we should criticize them more on, because as it says here in this study, a majority of infant formula health claims are poorly supported. So it says basically that 50% of the claims didn't name any specific ingredient. 26% of products had claims supported by a specific scientific reference. So only 26% of those claims had a specific scientific reference. And of those claims, of those 26%, 88% of which were funded by the formula industry, had formula industry authors or both. So remember when it said in the code, if I get it back, only scientific and factual information free from commercial bias used in the care of babies and their parents. Well, that's kind of not really being respected, right? So instead of criticizing them for lobbying against a specific thing, which we have some evidence that they're doing, but not a lot of evidence, we should instead criticize them on the fact that they pathologize normal baby behavior. They make poorly supported claims. We should criticize them for that. They also sneakily lobby by saying, on one hand, hey, we interact responsively with public authorities and public officials, but on the back end, they sneakily fund a lot of groups that push their interests. Also, they're constantly breaking the code. So that's something else that we should criticize them, and much more. If you want, I'll link the 2023 Lancet investigation in the description down below so you can read it. But now, why is it important? Why shouldn't we just, who cares if, women are breastfeeding or using baby formula? Who cares, right? But it's quite important because in the series by the Lancet, it had one paper about breastfeeding, and it says that breastfeeding is really important because there's some things that baby formula cannot replace. For example, hormones. There's some hormones in the breast milk that cannot be replaced by baby formula. There's the microgut biome that you get from your mother that cannot be replaced. There's also the fact that, breastfeeding increases oxytocin for both the mother and the baby. It's better for the health of mother. And also, I don't know if it's 100% true, but apparently it increases IQ by 3.76 points. And so to conclude, there's some mothers that are, that cannot breastfeed. But what we should do, instead of judging mothers' choices about whether or not they breastfeed or whether or not they use baby formula, we should make it as easy as possible to breastfeed by giving them paid maternity leave, paid parental leave even, that show that it increases the percentage of breastfeeding done. You could also make workspaces more accepting of mothers that are breastfeeding. You could also do all sorts of things, better education for breastfeeding. You could do all sorts of things that would make breastfeeding the more logical choice. Now, thank you for watching, and let me know if you have any disagreements. Bye-bye.